Joining us now from California in San Jose, the radio voice of the San Jose Sharks. It's our pleasure to have Dan Rusanowsky back on the program. How are you, Dan?
I am sheltering in place and doing just great. Both of you guys hope we're doing well, and let's get through this thing together.
Yep. Do you think that your area was either ahead of the curve or the issues were just there first or spotted first in San Jose? That's how people are going to remember it, because the first news of no, you're not getting together came where you are, Dan.
Well, that's correct. And I'd say that the authorities here have been ahead of the curve in understanding what the seriousness of the spread of the virus is. We still obviously don't know whether this is the next bubonic plague or whether it's something less than that. But I think the precautions they have for trying to flatten the curve were certainly reasonable. And everybody has been so good at taking part in that. So tip of the cap to the people in Santa Clara County and the Bay Area, but all across the country and all across the world, really, where we're trying to fight this terrible thing.
Have you heard at all what the different Sharks are doing during this? Are they hunkering down too? Are they taking to social media to talk about it at all?
Well, I found out that Logan Couture has got a book club started. He got that posted on the Sharks website today, which was kind of cool, where he really likes to read novels, and he just posted up something that he's reading, and he's going to review it for the fans and stay in communication with them. My colleague on television, Randy Hahn, has been promoting the fact that we should be patronizing restaurants, and I've been doing the same thing with cooking at home. And a variety of other topics, too. I'm not sure exactly how many people have left the Bay Area. I don't have a count on that, but I do know that Bob Bugner made his way back to Windsor to be with his family, and I'm sure that that's happened in a couple of other instances. But for the most part, everybody's hunkering down and just trying to stay positive.
We're talking Sharks hockey with Dan Rusanowsky, Sharks radio play-by-play. We had Dennis Bernstein on earlier, and we touched a little bit on a lot of different subjects, one of which was the Sharks, and Mick just said, hard to believe looking at the standings. Do you think this can be I'm not saying Flyers turnaround from where they were one year, even with Richards and Carter, I think it was 2009, and then the next year they got all the way to the Stanley Cup final. Surely this team still is too good for this. Do you think if it's a stock that you're telling me and Mick, buy Shark stock, it will be up at this time next year, Dan?
Well, I'd be a buyer for sure, and I've seen this happen before over the years here with San Jose. You go back to the last time that they missed the Stanley Cup playoffs, and that was 2015. The next year they were in the Stanley Cup final. You go back one time before that to 2003. They missed the playoffs. They had a coaching change in the midseason, which was the last time that happened before this particular campaign. Next year, went to the conference final. And so, that's two times in 20 years. And let's not also forget that Doug Wilson has just been a steady hand on the tiller here in San Jose with a forward-thinking staff and with a very, very smart use of money and time and resources. So I don't see, given the core group of people they have here, they've got three top defensemen. They've got Erik Karlsson. They've got Brent Burns. They got Marc-Edouard Vlasic. Martin Jones has shown that he can be a good goaltender. It's kind of been a tough couple of years for him. But, last season when it was really on the line, he was there. Team went to the conference final. And there are changes, obviously, that have to come, and they will come, and there's a lot of work to do. That's the one thing that Doug Wilson said was the team does have a lot of work to do in the course of the off season once we get there. And obviously that's going to be something that's a work in progress, starting with the draft, whenever it is we have that. So these are things that the team has been through before, but I think that the leadership in the organization has always done a really good job of having bounce backs, and the talent's just too good there to not see that happen.
Outside of avoiding injuries, which every team wants to do, Dan, to your eyes, what's the one piece of work you think this team should attend to first when they can?
Well, I think it's building up, obviously, the talent base that they have. They've got guys that are with the San Jose Barracuda in the AHL, but they're really, really young. So they're kind of caught in a spot where these players that have potential aren't quite ready for the NHL yet, but they're going to get there. And on the flip side of that, you've got, you just got the distribution of players on your roster that isn't exactly where you want it to be. And that was part of what happened last year with the team going into transition. If you talk to Doug, he'd tell you that the one thing that they're missing are a couple of wingers on the team, and that could change the whole mix entirely. But I just say adding some depth to that to deal with some of the ultimate injuries that do happen and continue to adjust. They've got to make a decision, too, about Bob Boughner, and I'd be one of the guys that says that he definitely deserves an opportunity to be the full-time coach here. So that's probably where you begin, and then you go from there with some of the pieces that we talked about and the continued development of the players that they have in the organization.
We're with Dan Rusanowsky talking Sharks hockey. Okay, that was on my list, Bob Boughner. We hope he does come back, and you almost want to give him a fair shot when you hire somebody almost right out of training camp and everything else. So we hope that situation does take care of itself. What about Joe Thornton? I wouldn't want it to end like this. He alluded to still wanting to come back, giving it another shot, and if the Sharks weren't good, then opening up the idea to be able to, even at 40, try to help another club if it's not San Jose moving forward. If it's odds, would you say that it's 7 out of 10 that Joe will be back? And if he does come back, it is only with San Jose, Dan?
I'd say that's pretty fair. Joe loves playing in San Jose. He's dedicated to the organization and appreciates what the organization has done for him. But, he transformed this franchise. And so I think that his first choice would obviously be to finish the job that he started way back in 2005 when we picked him up in that big deal with the Boston Bruins. I'll never forget it because we were broadcasting a game in Dallas, and right away we understood that we were given a starting lineup. You know how you get one from the PR people that had all of the players that were traded in the lineup. And then the first, I had gone to the press room meal in Dallas at that game, and I saw Jim Fahey and Nico Dimitrako sitting in there having a meal. Now, usually the guys that aren't playing don't come in at 5:30 to the press room, but these guys were having a little something to eat in the press room. So I said, well, they're not playing. And then just before the face-off, what happens? Ron Wilson, who was the coach at the time, calls the referees over, and they're looking at the official lineup sheet that they turn into the league. And I made a comment on the air that sometimes you fill in the wrong name. You might have the wrong name on there. You want to make sure you get it right. There might have been a mistake. So they want to make sure it's okay. Meanwhile, we're given this lineup that shows that Marco Sturm and Brad Stewart and Wayne Primo are supposed to be playing. Well, they drop the puck. There's a line change. And I'm calling the game, and I hear myself saying, Fahey passes the puck to Dimitrakos. Meanwhile, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, I just saw those guys having a meal at 5:30. What the heck's going on? And we counted the bench, and we saw that there was one player missing, and the guys that weren't on the ice, that weren't on the lineup, were the three players that ended up getting traded. So we knew something really big had happened. So, going back to those days, I'd say Joe Thornton would love to finish the job. He is just such a dedicated athlete, a great player, an outstanding human being. And there's nobody more than Sharks fans that would love to see him come back and finish things out. Along with, this year we had Patrick Marleau here for a 20th year as a Shark. He's another guy that's just given it his absolute all and, deserved the chance to try to get a Stanley Cup, ended up in Pittsburgh. We'll see what happens over the course of the summer with his career.
The contract to Erik Karlsson has come under some criticism. Not him as a player. We know he's a dynamic player. How does he fit into the Sharks team? How important has he become to this team?
Well, I think he's really important because he's such a game changer. That's the big thing about him. He's got that skill, he's got that ability, and that extra confidence that you have in a player that we've seen. And you look at his history. He and the Ottawa Senators made it to the Stanley Cup final and didn't win the cup, but obviously he was a big game changer in that. He's led his team in scoring before coming to San Jose a couple of times. And so he's somebody that just makes a huge difference at the biggest moments. There's two players like that on the Sharks team on defense, Brent Burns being the other one. And we've seen the value that he's brought to the organization. So they're different players. They're definitely different people. But I think he's starting to find his place in the organization where his role is slightly different than perhaps it was in Ottawa, where he was, the one beacon that everybody was looking at all the time. But here you have several. You've got Brent Burns. You've got Marc-Edouard Vlasic. You've got Logan Couture, who I think is one of the key playoff performers in the NHL these last few years. So I think that it's settling in nicely, and I think it's just going to take a little bit more time.
Talking Sharks hockey here with Dan Rusanowsky. Obviously, the Joe Pavelski factor. We discussed in our last segment with Dennis about Pavelski, and there's only so much money, and he did score 38, and that's probably the peak, and then you have to make tough decisions. Where are you on not re-signing him? Was there any chance to do a smaller contract? Do we just get caught up in the numbers game? Obviously, it looks bad on the organization now, and we can compare what Joe has been doing in San Jose anyway, and it's not Sharks numbers from last year. Was it just time that it's hard to take as a fan or as a broadcaster? How do you examine this whole thing almost 1 year later?
Well, the way I look at it is that year one of the 3-year deal that he signed with Dallas was the year that they were going to miss him probably the most. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that that's what happened. But if you look at the bigger picture, it makes kind of an interesting parallel to when Patrick Marleau left to go to Toronto. As it turned out, that last year of that deal, what happened? Well, obviously the Maple Leafs needed that money for somebody else, for lack of a better way of putting it. And he wound up coming back to San Jose during the course of that process. I'm not saying the same thing's going to happen for Joe Pavelski, but at least in terms of where he ends up in year 3. But I think that when you make these deals, that's the thing that you risk. You don't know where those players are going to end up in year 3 or what your requirements are. And you look at Dallas, they've got Miro Heiskanen, who's an unbelievable talent. They've got Klingberg. They've got, Tyler Seguin. So they have a bunch of other players like Toronto that are relatively young that are going to start to come into more management of your money as well. So, Joe Pavelski is an iconic figure in the history of the Sharks, and everybody misses him dearly. However, I do think that this is the 1 year that it was going to be most sincerely felt. But as Logan Couture has transited into the captain's role and done a really good job of that, as the integration comes on with some of the players. And then what we're going to see with changes to the team, and, there are going to be changes to the team to make them a better club. So we'll have to see how all that plays out. But, when you have all of those things happening at once, and then you throw in the serious injuries to people like Erik Karlsson and like Tomas Hertl, who's an outstanding player that's a big piece for this team. Then you've got, people squeezing their sticks a little tighter. Timo Meier signing a bigger contract and feeling more responsibility and wanting to do that. Evander Kane being in the midst of all that mix and scoring goals. And he's the one guy that scored a lot of goals for the team this year. I think all of that is a process that's going to get better. And again, back to Pavelski, I think that the disappointment of him leaving is going to lessen as time goes on.
Well, we've checked a lot of the boxes from Thornton to Wilson, Bugner, Pavelski, Carlson. You brought up Meier, Hertl. Moving forward, maybe we'll end with this, and we just have just over a minute left. If Ottawa wins the lottery with that pick, what will it mean? Is it just better if that pick, the San Jose pick, is just 4th and we can hide that player? Or do you think it's going to be a legacy that we're going to talk about in hockey forever? Could be Jamie Drysdale, and he could be an impact defenseman for 20 years. How does that play out where you are, Dan?
Well, to me, it's probably just as well that pick's going to go to Ottawa, because it means a Western Conference team's not going to get a top 4 player. So, unless something happens at the draft table. So you could look at it that way. The other thing is that the Sharks do have a first-round pick now, and they got it for Barclay Goodrow, which was an incredible return for a guy that is a valuable piece and a real tribute to Barclay and what he's meant to the San Jose Sharks. So fortunately, the Sharks do have a draft pick, and I seem to remember a few years where guys down late in the first round turned out to be pretty darn good hockey players. So all in all, I think that's going to be less of an issue, but because they have a pick now. But also, when this trade was made and when the season started going the way it was, we all predicted that Ottawa would probably win the draft lottery anyway, just because the last time the Sharks won the draft lottery, they lost the pick to Tampa Bay, and they ended up drafting Vinny Lecavalier first overall. So we've seen this act before, and it won't be as big an issue that way. At least it shouldn't be.
Dan, great stuff. Be well. Thank you for this.
I appreciate that. Thanks, guys.
Dan Rusanowsky, Mick, there's a lot of items on the Sharks table, right? If it was an old school kind of flea market, you look over and go, we got a lot of things here, right? There's certain teams that are sexy for different reasons. These are sexy discussion points because there's a lot here. You look at this roster and you say to yourself, how the heck did this happen this year? So hopefully we're back to playing hockey soon, and we'll see if there is a Sharks turnaround this year like there was from 2015 to 2016.